They heard pounding from inside the coffin, not faint, not imagined, desperate, furious blows echoing from beneath the marble lid. The priests froze, courtiers whispered, but no one moved to open it. Inside, Zeno, Emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, was alive. Alive, buried, and slowly suffocating in the darkness. The man who had ruled the last great bastion of Rome, who had outmaneuvered assassins, conspirators, and barbarians, was dying in a tomb built for him while he still breathed. But before we reach that coffin, we must understand how Zeno rose to the throne no Roman thought he deserved. The year was 474 AD. The empire in the east, what we call the Byzantine Empire today, still glittered with gold mosaics, incense-filled cathedrals, and the illusion of unshakable power. But under the surface, it was a snake pit, where generals, senators, and even churchmen sharpened their daggers in whispers. Into this world walked a man named Tarasis Kodisa, Rusomblada Diots, a name that already marked him as an outsider. He wasn't from the ancient aristocracy of Constantinople. He wasn't even a Latin-speaking Roman. Tarasis was an Isaurian, from the rough mountainous backcountry of southern Anatolia. To the polite society of the capital, Isaurians were barely civilized, mountain bandits dressed up in Roman armor. He was broad-shouldered, scarred from battle, and carried himself like a man who had survived more knife fights than dinner parties. But Tarasis had something the silk-robed senators didn't: a soldier's instincts and an ability to bend when the wind shifted instead of breaking. The Eastern Empire was ruled then by Emperor Leo the Riand, an old man balancing on a throne surrounded by enemies. The barbarians were no longer at the gates, they were inside the palace. The Germanic general Aspar controlled much of the army, and his influence over the emperor was suffocating. Aspar's people saw Tarasis as a blunt instrument, a provincial fighter who could be used to counter rival factions. But Tarasis wasn't just muscle, he was watching, learning, and waiting. Through military campaigns and careful maneuvering, he climbed the ranks until he commanded the Imperial Guard. In the process, he earned a new name: Zeno, a Greek veneer to smooth the edges of his foreign origins. The name was a costume, but the man inside it was still pure Isaurian steel. And then came the marriage. Zeno caught the eye of Ariadne, the emperor's daughter. She was imperial blood, a political prize beyond imagining for a man of his birth. Their union wasn't a romance for the ages, but a calculated move by Emperor Leo. By marrying Ariadne to Zeno, Leo brought the Isaurian general into the royal circle and secured a loyal sword at his side. But loyalty in Constantinople was worth less than the gold it was stamped on. In 471, the simmering tension between Emperor Leo and Aspar erupted into a silent coup. Zeno sided with Leo, and in a daring strike, Aspar and his son were assassinated. With Aspar gone, the Isaurian faction, led by Zeno, became the most powerful in the empire. The aristocrats of Constantinople seethed, whispering that their capital had been taken over by mountain barbarians. 3 years later, Emperor Leo died, leaving the throne to his young grandson Leodester, the son of Zeno and Ariadne. The boy was too young to rule alone, so Zeno became co-emperor, and when the boy died within months, Zeno was left as sole ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. It should have been the pinnacle of his life. It was instead the start of his torment. The moment he placed the imperial diadem on his head, Zeno realized he was surrounded by enemies who thought him unworthy. The Senate despised his accent, the church distrusted his Isaurian roots, and the army's loyalty was paper thin. His own mother-in-law, Empress Verina, began plotting against him almost immediately. Zeno's early reign was a nightmare of betrayals. Verina conspired to place her lover Patricius on the throne. When that failed, she turned to her own brother, Basiliscus, a man more skilled at treachery than governing. In 475, Basiliscus launched a coup while Zeno was away, forcing the emperor to flee the city under cover of night. Imagine it, the most powerful man in the Eastern world sneaking through the shadows of Constantinople's alleyways, his wife and child in tow, bribing guards to let them escape before dawn. Behind him, the city's gates closed, and Basiliscus was crowned emperor. For most rulers, that would have been the end of the story. But Zeno was not most rulers. From exile in Isauria, he began to gather loyal troops, sending messengers into the capital to bribe, threaten, and sway key players. Meanwhile, Basiliscus was making enemies of his own, raising taxes, alienating the church, and even letting the city suffer during a brutal heatwave when the aqueduct system failed. Constantinople began to remember the Isaurian they had driven out. In 476, just a year after his exile, Zeno marched back into the capital. Basiliscus surrendered under the promise that no blood would be shed. Zeno kept his word, at least publicly. Basiliscus and his family were sealed inside a dry cistern, where they slowly starved to death. That same year, the Western Roman Empire officially fell when the barbarian Odoacer deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. Rome itself was gone. The Eastern Empire, Zeno's empire, was now the last remnant of Roman glory. Zeno understood the weight of that moment. His survival was no longer just about politics. It was about being the last emperor to carry the flame of Rome. But surviving in Constantinople meant living in a world where friends could turn assassin overnight. Even Ariadne, his wife, wavered in loyalty. The court was a hall of mirrors, every smile hiding a dagger. Zeno played the game with a soldier's pragmatism. He made peace with former enemies, bribed potential rebels, and married diplomacy to brutality in equal measure. Yet every time he crushed one conspiracy, another sprang up. His reign was a cycle of betrayal, retaliation, and uneasy truces. And in this poisonous environment, the seeds of his downfall were quietly being sown. For Zeno, the greatest threats would not come from barbarian armies or foreign invaders. They would come from the silk-draped halls of his own palace, from the people who should have been his protectors. Because in Constantinople, death rarely came with a sword. It came with a cup of wine, a whispered lie, or a coffin lid closing while you were still breathing. The palace walls in Constantinople did not echo with silence, they whispered. Soft footsteps on marble corridors, the faint clink of a goblet in the next chamber, and somewhere in the shadows the low murmur of conspirators weaving their plans. Zeno, the Isaurian who had fought his way to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, now sat upon it like a man perched on a dagger's edge. His enemies were no longer barbarians at the gates, they were senators, generals, and even family seated at his own table. From the moment he became emperor in 474, betrayal was not an occasional threat, it was the very air he breathed. Zeno's greatest crime, in the eyes of Constantinople's elite, was not treason, tyranny, or even incompetence. It was simply this: he was not one of them. An Isaurian, from the rugged mountains of Asia Minor, his accent was harsh to the Greek ear, his manners considered coarse by the capital's aristocracy. In a court where lineage was currency, Zeno was a man holding counterfeit coins, and the court made sure he never forgot it. Even his marriage to Ariadne, daughter of the Great Emperor Leothastus, was less a bond of love than a political chain. Ariadne's mother, the Empress Verina, despised Zeno from the start, calling him a soldier pretending to be a Caesar. That venom would one day find its way into the bloodstream of the empire. It began with whispers, rumors that Zeno's Isaurian guards were plotting to seize the treasury, accusations that he planned to sell the empire's provinces to foreign tribes. All lies. But in Constantinople, lies travelled faster than the truth, and they struck deeper. In 475, the trap was sprung. Led by Verina herself, a faction of generals and senators seized the capital. They crowned another man emperor, Basiliscus, Verina's own brother. Zeno barely escaped with his life. Picture it, the Emperor of Rome, slipping out of his palace in the dead of night, his cloak torn, his face hidden, fleeing the city that had once bowed to him. Behind him, the chants of the mob filled the air. Down with the Isaurian, down with the barbarian. At first, Zeno might have believed that exile was a mercy, but as Basiliscus took the throne, the empire began to rot. The new emperor alienated the church, bled the treasury dry, and watched helplessly as famine spread through the capital. In the darkness of his exile, Zeno's allies began to return. Old generals who had betrayed him came whispering again, this time with offers of loyalty if he could take back the throne. Zeno, wary but desperate, agreed. In 476 he marched on Constantinople, and the city, starving and furious at Basiliscus, opened its gates. Basiliscus fled to a church for sanctuary. Zeno swore he would spare him, then quietly had him and his family locked inside a dry cistern, left to die of thirst. It was the first time Zeno had become his enemy's mirror, and it would not be the last. By the time he reclaimed the throne, Zeno had learned a bitter truth. Loyalty in Constantinople was a currency that could be spent, stolen, or forged, and no one proved it more than Ilus, his old friend and fellow Isaurian. Ilus had been Zeno's right hand in battles, the man who had helped him retake the throne. But alliances in this city were never carved in stone, only in wet clay, ready to be reshaped. When Verina plotted once more to kill Zeno, Ilus turned the empress over to him. Zeno imprisoned her, thinking Ilus his truest friend. But the very next year, Ilus himself turned traitor. Ilus freed Verina and placed her under his own protection. Together, they plotted to replace Zeno with a new puppet emperor, Leontius. It was a betrayal layered in irony. The man who had once saved Zeno from Verina's wrath now sided with her to destroy him. Zeno responded with a cruelty born of desperation. He hunted Verina until she died in captivity, denied even a proper burial. Ilus and Leontius fled to the mountains of Isauria, gathering troops for war. The empire braced for civil conflict. The battle between Zeno and Ilus was not a clash of strangers. It was the slow, agonizing death of a friendship. Ilus had once once called Zeno brother. Now he called him usurper. The war dragged on for 4 long years, ending in a siege that starved Ilus and Leontius into surrender. Zeno, refusing mercy, had them both beheaded. Their heads were sent to Constantinople, displayed as a warning to all who would plot against him. But in the flickering torchlight of the palace, Zeno must have felt a different truth, that each head on a pike was also a piece of his own humanity, cut away. By now, the Eastern Roman court had become a snake pit with no exits. Zeno's reign was a cycle of betrayal and revenge, each act breeding the next. Generals turned against him, were executed, and replaced by men who would one day do the same. Even Ariadne, his wife, would conspire against him again. Every alliance was fragile, every oath was suspect, and the emperor himself, once a soldier of the frontier, had become as ruthless and deceptive as those he once despised. By the late 480s, Zeno ruled an empire at peace only on paper. Beneath the surface, the factions were sharpening their knives. The streets hummed with the same whispers that had nearly ended him before, and perhaps the most chilling part was this: Zeno could no longer tell which enemies sat outside his palace walls, and which slept under his own roof. This was the Eastern Roman Empire in its purest form, not a city of marble and gold, but a web of betrayals where even emperors could be caught like flies. Zeno had survived the coups, the civil wars, and the poisoned goblets, but the deadliest trap was yet to come, one that would not be set by a senator, a general, or a foreign enemy, but by those who claimed to serve him in life and in death. It began with a sound no emperor should ever hear, the muffled echo of his own fist pounding against a wooden lid. In the darkness, his breath came hot and shallow, the scent of fresh pine filling his nostrils, mingling with the sickly sweetness of incense drifting through the cracks. His ears strained for voices outside, for footsteps, for any sign that someone still believed he was alive. But the world beyond the coffin was silent. Zeno, ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire, was now reduced to a frantic heartbeat in a wooden box, and no one was coming to open it. The palace corridors above were still. The courtiers who had once bowed at his feet were nowhere to be found. In their absence, the shadows of the past pressed in on him. He thought of the betrayals, the whispers in the dark halls, the smiles that hid knives. Every face he had trusted now blurred into the black void around him. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth. He had not been placed here by accident. This was no tragic mistake of medicine, no misunderstanding of death. This was a choice, made by those who had once sworn loyalty. The night before, the city of Constantinople had been a cauldron of rumours. Zeno had fallen ill, they said. Others whispered that he was dead already. Still others claimed divine punishment had struck him for sins against the church. Outside the palace, the masses celebrated, some openly drinking in the streets. The Xorian barbarian was gone, they believed. A man they had never fully accepted as Roman. A foreigner who had clawed his way to the throne. His death, they thought, was an end to shame. But here, in this suffocating darkness, Zeno's reality was far from over. He felt the wood above him with trembling fingers, rough, splintering in places. His mind raced. Could he break it? Could his voice carry beyond the walls? He pressed his mouth to the lid and screamed, the sound bouncing back at him. No one answered. Somewhere above, in the candlelit corridors of the palace, Empress Ariadne, his own wife, walked without haste. She knew the truth. She had known it from the moment the coffin was nailed shut. There were whispers that she had even ordered it, perhaps to end his reign without the spectacle of execution, perhaps to silence a man she could no longer control, perhaps out of vengeance for all the betrayals between them. The air grew heavier, sweat dripped from his forehead, sliding down into his eyes. His fingernails clawed desperately at the lid, leaving bloody crescents in the wood. The rhythm of his breathing turned uneven, his lungs begging for air that refused to come. In his mind, fragments of his life replayed in jagged flashes. The day he seized the throne from Basiliscus, the cold stares of the Senate, the jeering mobs that had once driven him into exile, the endless web of lies he had spun to stay alive in a city that never wanted him. And now, that same city would bury him alive. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. In the coffin's pitch-black prison, time lost meaning. His pounding slowed. His screams turned to hoarse whispers. His thoughts began to slip into fevered visions. He saw himself not as an emperor, but as a child in Isauria, barefoot, chasing the wind. He saw the battles fought, the enemies crushed, the power won. And then he saw the faces of the dead, men who had once trusted him, now standing in silent judgment. Some say his last moments were not silent at all, that his final cries could still be heard from deep within the tomb as the priests sealed it. Others insist that Ariadne forbade anyone from opening the coffin, even when courtiers begged for mercy. What is certain is this: Zeno's death was not the peaceful passing of a ruler in bed. It was a slow, suffocating end, delivered not by enemy swords, but by the people closest to him. When the earth finally closed over the coffin, Constantinople moved on. New rulers took the throne. The streets bustled again. The man who had once commanded legions was now just another body under stone and soil, no grand funeral march, no eternal flame, only whispers and the knowledge that perhaps, just perhaps, the emperor had still been breathing when they buried him. Centuries later, his name would be little more than a footnote in the annals of Byzantine history. Yet the manner of his death, the horror of it, lingers in the imagination of those who hear it. It forces one to wonder, was this the inevitable fate of a ruler who thrived on intrigue and deception? Or was it the ultimate betrayal, proof that in the politics of empire even an emperor is never truly safe? And now I'll leave you with a question. If you had the power to decide his fate, to open the coffin or leave it sealed, would you have shown mercy or let the earth keep its grip?